Hey everyone, and welcome to a deep dive into a topic that's really, unfortunately, still so relevant today. Violence against women in Europe. We're diving into a report here called Gender, Institutions, and Development. It's got a ton of data compiled just this year in 2023. You know what's really caught my eye is how this report goes beyond just the numbers. It digs into the cultural context surrounding this issue.
And that context is really crucial. It shapes how violence is perceived, how it's reported, and ultimately how it's addressed.
Exactly. And one of the things that really jumped out at me at the beginning was how the report kind of lays out this hidden history of violence against women. You know, for a long time, it was like this unspoken problem, kind of shrouded in these societal norms and even shielded by legal systems.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It wasn't really until the late 20th century that things started to change.
Yeah.
Violence against women started to be recognized as a human rights violation, and that really paved the way for some pretty big changes in Europe.
Yeah.
Are you ready to dive in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Data on the screen, numbers come alive. Male, female flows where the patterns thrive. Visual charts, public colors unify. Gender decoded, bringing truth to light. Small drum fill. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling, facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling, facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide.
Buckle up. We're going to uncover some pretty shocking facts.
Yeah.
And hopefully, we'll leave all of you with a better understanding of just how complex this issue really is.
You know, violence against women has been ignored for a long time. Hidden, really.
Yeah.
Societies, legal systems, they just didn't recognize it as a problem, you know?
Yeah, it's almost hard to believe something so fundamental took so long to be acknowledged, right?
Right.
But I'm curious, like, what were some of the turning points in Europe?
Well, for Europe, you can't talk about this without talking about the Istanbul Convention. That was back in 2011.
Right.
That was a big deal, you know. It aimed to prevent violence, protect victims, and hold perpetrators accountable.
Yeah.
And the EU got involved, too. They issued directives, pushed member states to really enact stricter laws.
Okay, so it wasn't just lip service. There were actions taken.
Absolutely.
That's good. That's encouraging, you
Yeah.
know? But, like, does it translate to improvements? Like, let's look at the data. This report compares countries based on the percentage of women experiencing violence.
Right.
Either physical or sexual.
Right.
From an intimate partner.
Right. During their lifetime.
During their lifetime, right.
And the numbers are startling.
Yeah.
They go from a low of 10% in places like Switzerland,
Okay.
Armenia,
Okay.
to a high of 32% in Turkey. That's almost a third of the female population.
Wow, those numbers are really jarring. I have to admit, I expected the rates to be much lower in countries known for their gender equality.
Yeah.
Like Switzerland has a low percentage, right?
Right.
Aren't they known for progressive policies?
They are. And this is the paradox, right?
Okay.
Sometimes, you know, those countries we think of as being the most advanced when it comes to gender equality.
Like the Nordic countries?
Like the Nordics, exactly.
Okay.
They actually report higher rates of violence.
That's interesting. So why is that?
What do you think could explain that?
Well, could it be that women in those countries feel more empowered to report these crimes?
Yeah.
Maybe there's less stigma,
Right.
more awareness, maybe even a wider definition of what is abuse.
Exactly.
So that could skew the statistics.
You're spot on. Societal context really matters when you interpret these numbers.
Yeah.
It might not necessarily mean there's more violence in those countries, just that women are more likely to report it.
So like a seemingly higher percentage could actually be a good thing.
Potentially.
Okay.
It could indicate a shift towards greater awareness and support.
That's interesting. But regardless of the reporting rate, any percentage of women experiencing violence is just unacceptable.
It is. And remember, even the lowest figure, that 10%, still represents a large number of women.
Right.
And then there's the underreporting factor.
Right, all the people that don't report.
All the women who choose to remain silent due to fear, shame, or just a lack of support.
It's really sad to think about the human stories behind these statistics. The fear, the trauma, the long-term health consequences, both physical and mental.
Yeah.
It's just a reminder that this isn't just about numbers, it's about real lives.
Right. And while we often focus on the victims, which we should,
Right.
we can't forget about the men.
Right.
There's a small percentage of men who are perpetrators, but there's a much larger group who can be allies
Right.
in prevention and advocacy.
That's a good point. Men can challenge those harmful stereotypes, support survivors, and advocate for change.
Absolutely.
What about the people that get overlooked?
You're talking about transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming individuals.
Yeah. They face unique challenges,
They do.
and they often, fall through the cracks
Absolutely.
when it comes to legal protection and support services. We need to acknowledge their vulnerability and, work towards a more inclusive approach to addressing violence.
We do. Now, let's move on to some of the less obvious aspects. I think we'll find them quite thought-provoking.
Hit me.
Okay, let's talk about economics.
Okay.
Did you know that violence against women has a massive impact on national economies?
Really?
Yeah, we're talking billions of euros lost every year.
Billions. I had no idea the economic impact was that significant.
It is. Healthcare costs, legal proceedings, lost productivity.
Yeah.
It all adds up. It's not just a personal tragedy, it's a drain on society.
Wow. So it's not just a social and moral issue.
Yeah.
It's an economic one, too.
Exactly. And here's another thing. Even that low 10% we saw,
Yeah.
in some countries, that represents a huge number of women.
Yeah.
And when you factor in underreporting, which is almost certainly happening everywhere,
Right.
the true figures are much, much higher.
That is a chilling thought. It's like an iceberg,
Yeah.
What we see on the surface is just a fraction of the real problem.
Yeah.
So what are some of the underlying reasons for these variations in violence rates?
Well, one of the most striking trends is the link between traditional patriarchal norms
Yeah.
and higher rates of violence.
Right, okay.
Countries like Turkey, Moldova,
Right.
where those norms are still strong,
Yeah.
they tend to have significantly higher reported incidents.
Makes sense. If a society condones or minimizes violence against women as a way to maintain power structures, then you'd expect it to be more prevalent.
Exactly.
Are there other factors at play, too?
Absolutely. Economic factors can play a huge role.
Yeah.
Financial instability and dependence. They can trap women in abusive situations,
Right.
making it harder for them to leave.
Yeah.
When you don't have the resources to escape, the cycle of violence continues.
It's a vicious cycle. Poverty and violence feeding off each other.
Exactly.
Like a trap with no easy way out. But what about those countries with higher reporting rates? We talked about the Nordic countries earlier. Could their strong social safety nets,
Right.
and support systems,
Right.
could that contribute to those higher numbers?
That's a great point. It highlights the complex relationship between reporting and the actual incidents, right?
Right.
Countries with robust support systems, public awareness campaigns,
Right.
they often see higher reporting rates. It doesn't necessarily mean they have a bigger problem, just that victims are more likely to, to come forward.
Right. So it's not just about the numbers. It's about understanding the context
Exactly.
surrounding those numbers. Yeah. Do you think the variations in how violence is defined
Absolutely.
or perceived, could that play a role too?
Yeah, definitions of abuse vary across cultures,
Yeah.
What might be considered, acceptable in one society could be criminalized in another.
Right.
And even within the same country, individual perceptions of what is abuse can differ.
Right. Based on personal experiences, cultural background,
Absolutely.
even generational shifts.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got cultural norms, economic factors, and reporting practices.
Right.
All influencing those statistics. What about the legal systems themselves?
Right.
Do the laws and how they're enforced have an impact on violence rates?
Of course. The legal framework is crucial.
Okay.
Countries with strong laws against domestic violence,
Yeah.
shelters that are well-funded, specialized police units,
Right. Right.
they tend to see a positive impact.
Okay.
Not only do these measures encourage reporting, but they can also deter repeat offenses
Right.
and offer better protection.
So a proactive legal system can actually help break the cycle of
Right.
violence. That's good.
It is.
I imagine there are also places where the legal system is less developed. or enforcement is weak.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Regions that have been through conflicts or, have limited resources for their justice systems.
Yeah.
Addressing domestic violence becomes even more challenging.
Right. You have to factor in things like trauma, social upheaval,
Absolutely.
lack of basic infrastructure, all of that.
Yeah.
So it's a reminder that there are many layers to this issue. We've got historical legacies, cultural norms,
Right.
economic disparities, legal frameworks, all intertwined. It's a lot to grapple with.
It is.
Before we get overwhelmed, let's try to distill some key takeaways for our listener.
Right.
What are the most important things to remember?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that violence against women isn't just a personal problem. It's a societal problem.
Yeah.
It's deeply embedded,
Yeah.
in our cultures, our economies, our legal systems. And addressing it requires a multifaceted approach, right? That takes all these factors into account.
And we have to remember those percentages, right?
Yeah.
They represent real lives.
Absolutely.
Women whose stories often go unheard.
Yeah.
Even seemingly low percentages, right? They still represent a significant number of victims. Right. And the true extent of the problem is likely much larger.
Much larger, yeah.
Due to underreporting.
Right, exactly. But it's not all doom and gloom. The good news is we've seen real progress in many European countries. Policy changes, increased awareness, and a growing number of men who are actively involved in prevention and advocacy, all having a positive impact.
So where do we go from here? What can our listener do, as an individual?
Right.
To be part of the solution. It can feel overwhelming,
It can, but even small actions can make a difference,
Yeah.
Start by educating yourself. Learn about the signs of abuse,
Yeah.
the resources that are available in your community,
Yeah.
and ways to support survivors. And don't be afraid to speak up.
Yeah. I love that.
Challenge those harmful stereotypes. Be an advocate, for change within your circles.
Knowledge, action, advocacy.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that this is everyone's problem. We all have a role to play.
We do.
But sometimes it feels like those big societal problems are just too big,
Yeah.
Where do we even begin to make change?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's where it feels daunting. What if instead of thinking globally, we, think smaller?
Right. Think about your community. Like, what's happening right where you live?
That's a good point. Maybe it becomes less daunting if we make it local. So what kind of questions should we be asking
Yeah.
about our community?
Well, like, what kind of support services are there for victims?
Right.
Are the police, adequately trained
Right.
to handle these cases sensitively? Are there organizations working to raise awareness and challenging harmful attitudes?
Yeah, these are practical questions anyone can ask. And maybe by getting involved,
at a local level.
at a local level,
Yeah.
volunteering, donating, or just raising awareness, maybe we can start to make a difference.
Exactly. Real change often starts locally, right?
Yeah.
It's about engaging, supporting those on the front lines,
Right.
and creating a culture where violence is not tolerated.
Yeah.
And where survivors feel empowered to speak out.
That's a think globally, act locally, right?
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I want to touch on something you said earlier about the role men can play
Right.
in prevention and advocacy.
Right.
How can we encourage more men to be active allies?
That's a great question. It starts with education and open dialogue.
Yeah.
Men need to understand the complexities, challenge traditional notions of masculinity, and learn how to be supportive.
It's about creating a culture of respect, quality, and empathy, where men aren't just bystanders.
Right.
They're active participants in creating a safer world.
Wow, we've covered so much today. From the statistics to the cultural nuances, legal frameworks,
Yeah.
and the power of community action. What's the one message, the one takeaway we want to leave our listeners with?
I think it's this. Violence against women is complex, but it's not insurmountable. By
No.
understanding the factors, both globally and locally,
Right.
we can all create a world where those percentages, those numbers representing real women, start to go down.
Down, down, down. Until hopefully one day they reach zero.
It's a vision worth striving for. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. It was a heavy but important conversation.
It was. And remember, change starts with each of us. No action is too small.